Welcome to Let's Talk Near Death, the podcast show where we talk about life, death, and experiences somewhere in between. My name is Kirsty Salisbury, the host of the show, and I welcome you to join me as I talk to everyday people with not so everyday experiences. You may also wish to join the conversation on the Let's Talk Near Death Facebook page or access additional VIP content as a premium subscriber via Patreon. For just a couple of dollars a month, you can get an early access to episodes, additional bonus content, and your chance to connect with my guests. To do so, simply visit patreon.com/Kirsty Salisbury. Let's talk near death.
And then he said, look at them closely. So when I made eye contact with each individual, that's when I realized that those are my past lives. Any of us who had a near-death experience, this is our main thing in common. Once you open that door, you cannot close it all the way.
Today I'm chatting with three-time near experiencer Niell. Laurie had her first experience at age 5, followed by her second at age 8, and the third one when she was in her early 20s. As a result of these experiences, Laurie went on to a career of nursing and to help others. Her intuitive capacities have opened widely through her experiences. She has the gift of knowing what the death experience is, the clear gift of direct communication with higher self, and the ability to communicate with the guidance of others. Niell, I can't wait to get into this. Welcome to Let's Talk Near Death.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm super excited to have this conversation. Now, just to let our listeners know, we've already talked about this, Laurie and I, how often when near-death experiences get together, there is some technical things that go on. Laurie seems to have a little bit of a history with the electromagnetic interference. So the noise might cut in and out. We may have some issues, but we're just going to roll with this. It's always interesting when I get multiple experiences on one call, how much this kicks in. So we've already experienced that this morning, but we want to just continue with this conversation because I know there's some amazing content to come. So Laurie, thank you so much for being here. Tell us, how did this all start? What was going on in your life?
Well, when I was younger, my first near-death experience was when I was 5. That situation, my hearing test. You know, you go to school and then they test your hearing and your vision. It wasn't until kindergarten that they realized that I'm deaf in my right ear. So my dad being military, we went to the medical facility and they decided to do a surgery on my right ear to see if they could maybe correct that hearing. And when I went to the hospital, the nurse up on the floor, the pediatric floor, gave me my Demerol and Valium injections, the pre-op, which is, you know, the stuff that settles you down for your surgery. But she didn't chart it. She didn't document it. So when I got down to the operating room, the nurse downstairs said, oh, she hasn't had her pre-op injections. And being 5, she didn't believe me when I said I already had them. She thought I was a child just trying to get out of getting my shots.
Right.
So up on the floor, I had one in each bottom cheek. And the lady in the OR gave me one in each arm. So as soon as they put me under the anesthesia, I did go into cardiac arrest. And in that first experience, I just stayed in the hospital setting. When I first got out of body, I was really interested in everybody scurrying around and trying to fix something. And then it dawned on me, I could still hear very clearly because, you know, the alarm that goes off on the EKG machine when it's flatlining.
Yeah.
As soon as that noise started to bother me, I looked at the machinery and it dawned on me, if there's a flat line and I'm looking at my body from above it, maybe I'm dead. And I only knew what the flat line meant because there was a TV show in the 1970s here in the United States called Emergency. And it was about 2 paramedics. And they always showed, you know, the flat line. And as soon as I realized that I was in a death situation or something was unfamiliar, I thought to myself, my mom is going to be so mad at these people. And as soon as I thought about my mom, I didn't travel there. I didn't tell myself I wanted to go there. I was just in the waiting room, hovering near her right shoulder. And I was trying to communicate to her that something happened in the operating room and that they had made a mistake. I was even trying to tell her about getting all the shots. I got the double pre-op shots, and she was ignoring me. So I tried to reach my hand out and touch her shoulder and be like, Mom, I'm talking to you. And that's when my hand kind of went through her shoulder. And that's when I went, oh my gosh, something was really unfamiliar here. And I'm still perceiving everything as a 5-year-old. And while I was trying to figure out how I could tell her what was happening, a corpsman came out of the double doors from the OR and told my mom, we've got a problem. She went into cardiac arrest. And then while he was talking to her, they used the paddles to bring me back.
Right.
So then they didn't do the surgery that day. I couldn't believe it, but my parents let them try again 2 weeks later. And it turns out that they couldn't fix the hearing in my right ear. There's something called the tympanic membrane. It's the ear window. I have like 3 or 4 of them. So I can hear dog whistles, or I can feel dog whistles.
Yeah,
it's a vibration thing, right? So I'm very aware of vibration, but have decreased hearing. Interestingly, in my second near-death experience, they explained that that's because I listened to spirit in the right ear and I listened to the physical world in the left ear.
Oh, that's interesting, isn't it?
So, and there's a lot of people who do the kind of work that I do and that we do that have a hearing deficit in the right ear. And sometimes it's the opposite, but I'd say 80% of the time it's the right side. So something about the physiology there.
That's fascinating.
I've learned,
I've never heard of this, so this is really amazing.
We could probably fill 4 shows because since I'm 55 years old now, and we're talking about a 5-year-old near-death experience, the second one I was actually 7 years and 8 months. So some people will correct because they'll say, "Wait, you said you were 7," but I sometimes round up to 8. And then in the 30 years of nursing, studying near-death experiences, I have learned so much about how a lot of this works, But anyway, back to the experience. In that first one, it was very brief. Once they brought me back, I was back. The second near-death experience, I went in for a kidney biopsy because another school physical, they dip your urine to see if there's any, something coming up. And being a young kid, when they found a little bit of blood in the urine, they said, that's not normal. So then they go into a kidney workup, right? So they do a kidney biopsy at a teaching hospital in San Antonio, Texas. My dad was military. And one doctor's teaching the other how to do the biopsy. And as he advances the needle, they wouldn't put me under because the doctors from the original surgery said that I was allergic to anesthesia. They never admitted that they accidentally overdosed me. They never documented that.
Oh, right. Yes.
So from that point on, nobody wants to put me under, right, for a surgery. Yeah. So in this case, I'm awake and I'm watching the surgery on ultrasound while they're trying to get the kidney biopsy. And all of a sudden, it looked like there was ink spreading across the screen. And they got my teddy bear and they're trying to distract me because there's been a mistake. He accidentally pushed the button to collect the sample. So he put the knife out while he was still advancing towards the kidney. So he cut the blood supply to the liver by accident. And they didn't tell my mom. And they said, she needs to go home and be on bed rest after this procedure. And she said, you said that it was just an outpatient procedure and she'd be fine. Again, the doctors don't tell. This is so common in the medical world. They just said, just make sure she stays on bed rest for a couple days. Well, I snuck out of my room and climbed down a tree and went out and played with my friends. So the next morning I woke up hemorrhaging. And my mom took me back to the hospital. And they had to give me lots of blood, blood transfusions. And I got hepatitis B from a blood transfusion.
Oh, man, one thing after another.
These are all just medical mishaps, human error that, but back then, all they did for a transfusion was type and cross-match you. We didn't test it for anything else. The list could have been too long. So I get hepatitis B. And in that case, since we don't have liver transplants yet, it was a terminal diagnosis. And I was in the hospital for a couple weeks in what they call isolation, where everybody had to be masked and gowned to come in. And back then we didn't have disposables. It was heavy cotton, mask and gown. And one night they told my mom, they said, this is probably going to be it. Her vital signs are going down. And my mom was so mad at medical people at that point. She was a young mother. And this was the second time that a medical mishap had put me in a bind when I really was kind of healthy. And that night was my intense second near-death experience, where I did get out of body, went through the tunnel, and being raised a Southern Baptist, I had been assured that Jesus would be there. And the guy that walked up to me, I said, well, "Are you Jesus?" And he said, "No." And he said that Jesus was busy, which I thought, wait a minute, he had a burlap rope for a belt, a little, a flap on the top. Turns out that it was St. Francis, but the Baptists don't believe in the saints. The Catholics are the ones that, made the saints. So I hadn't learned about any saints in Sunday school or anything like that. I asked him, "Why are you greeting me?" And he said, "Well, I greet children and animals who don't have anybody here to greet them." And I said,
wow.
"Well, why don't I have anybody to greet me?" And that's when he looked a little exasperated, and he said, "You know what, let's go sit down." The setting that I was perceiving was my ideal outdoor setting. You know what I mean? Mountains in the background, lodgepole pines, meadow of wildflowers, water. And we went and sat on these really flat, comfortable rocks to talk. And he said, "You do this every time." I was like, "What?" I mean, he's treating me like I'm responsible for my death. And I said, you must not understand that I got hepatitis B from a blood transfusion, and I'm dying of hepatitis. Like, it's not my fault. And he looked at me and he said, "I'm talking to your soul." He said, "You do this every time." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "You escape physical life at the first opportunity, no matter how it's going." And then he shows me all these babies throughout time, right, who exit. And then when he waved his arm in the meadow, all of a sudden there's all these babies and toddlers and 3 adults. And he said, "Do you recognize these people?" And I said, "No." And then he said, "Look at them closely." So when I made eye contact with each individual, that's when I realized that those are my past lives. And I turned to him and I said, "I'm a Baptist and we don't believe in past lives." And he said, "I was Catholic once and we didn't believe in past lives either." He said, "It's not changing the fact, is it?" And I said, "Well, there was, again, mostly children. There was a male Plains Indian who died at 54 or 52 or 54, but he looked 80. And that was my longest lifetime yet, according to this man. And then there was like a 19-year-old French girl and a 28-year-old New Yorker, which was my most recent past life before the one I'm in now, which was an interesting contrast. And so, the long story short, I perceived that I was on the other side talking to this man and later the light for like 3 years. That's how many questions I had. When I woke up,
I can imagine.
When I spontaneously, because, nobody was going to code me. Nobody at the hospital setting was going to rush in and, do CPR when I died. They told my mom, "We're not going to revive her just to make her miserable for another few days." So I was a no code. So my mom walks through this whole experience by herself. And then when I wake up, the first thing I asked my mom was, "How old am I?" Because I thought I was gone for 3 years. And she said, "Oh, no, you're brain damaged. I don't know how long you weren't breathing." Because she was so stressed out that once I quit breathing and once my pulse stopped, she just threw herself over me and grieved, She was planning to call the nurses later. And in that time frame, that's when I woke up. So it was a spontaneous, the light sent me back and I did jump ahead. But in that experience, after St. Francis explained that this is what my soul did on a regular basis and was trying to talk me into getting back into my Lori body because he said, "I can fix the hepatitis." And I was like, well, he was kind of frustrating me because, I was ready to stay with him. And at one point, as they always do, he gave me the choice. "Do you want to stay here or do you want to get back in your body?" And I said, I want to stay here. So he's disappointed, but he looks at me, he turns around, and we start walking in this meadow. And as he's walking, he's going upward, like he's on an invisible escalator. And then I'm following him. We are literally going into the light. And that is pretty much what everybody else has described. You really feel like you're going home. There is absolutely no fear. You feel a little sad for the people on the other side that are going to miss you, but you know that they'll be okay. And as we were walking into that light, St. Francis stopped abruptly and and my energy went through him, like I didn't just run into his back. I went through him, and now I'm in front of him looking up at him. And he and the light are having some conversation that I can't perceive, I can't hear. And when he looked down at me, again, I'm still perceiving myself as this 7, almost 8-year-old child. He had these laughing blue eyes that looked just like Santa Claus on the Coke can. You know what I mean? They just are depicted as so, and he just said, so much for free will. And I woke up in the hospital bed, and I was back in my Lori lifetime. And the hepatitis was clear. And the teaching hospital had lab values that proved that I had hepatitis B. And they said, there's no such thing as clearing hepatitis B. So then, being a teaching hospital, they kept asking my mom, who came in last night and treated her with something? What did they give her? She said, nobody came in here. And the nurses at the nurses station also said, nobody went in there. And they just had a really hard time believing it. So that's when, for my Baptist parents, that was a miracle that just they prayed, and many people were praying. And, I came back. My third near-death experience, I had a ruptured ectopic pregnancy. That's where the baby bursts in the fallopian tube before, the pregnancy doesn't lodge in the uterus. So then if it's in the fallopian tube and it bursts, that's an emergency situation. Unfortunately, it happened on Christmas Eve, 1986. So I went to a small community hospital that didn't have an ultrasound tech on board. She was on call, but she wasn't there. She took an hour to get there because she had to put on her makeup and stuff and fix her hair. By the time she got there, I had bled out. And in that case, I'm literally in the emergency room and in that setting where my body's on the gurney still. And there appears to be an angel who I thought was beautiful, long, blonde, curly hair. And she's looking bored. And she's almost like she's filing her fingernails. And I was just like, where's the tunnel? And she said, you're not going anywhere. And I said, well, I'm out of body and I've done this a couple times. I think I've died from my ectopic pregnancy. And she reminded me that my 11-month-old son was in the waiting room sitting on my mom's lap. And then she took me there to show me that. She said, you're not leaving him. And she made me stay there and wouldn't open up the tunnel until the surgery could go and repair. Once I ended up clinically dead, the surgeons got right to it and obviously revived me. So out of my 3 near-death experiences, that was the only time. Well, no, those 2, the first and third, I was medically revived by staff, hospital staff. And the second one, and the most intense one, I was literally sent back by the light in a situation where mankind didn't expect that there was any way I could survive. So probably telling my story disjointed, but...
No, that's okay. I have been absolutely gripped by what you're saying. It's just so incredible, the detail. And yeah, thank you so much, Lori. It's a lot to think about. It's a lot for someone who's so young, 5 years old, nearly 8 years old. Yeah, wow, it's amazing. So I want to focus in a little bit more on the middle experience, because that seems to be the one where you have more, I guess,
where everything
more
changed.
detail. And yeah, that was the really life-defining one, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So when you came back from that, what were you thinking? Like, yes, you were thinking, I've been away for 3 years. How old am I? What's happened? But what was your life like just after that? How did your thoughts about the world, because it's quite a young age where maybe you didn't have a lot of worldview, where you were still working things out here. So what happened in those first few weeks and months after this experience?
Well, according to my parents, in some ways, they said I became an old lady after that, even though I was still a child. But the biggest, I think, challenge for me and for everybody in my family was they were all still Baptist. And I still identified as that because I wanted to belong in my family. But I'd been told things on the other side that didn't align with what the Baptists were teaching. And one of the first things that we ended up talking about when I woke up was the concept of hell. When I was being talked into trying to come back down into my body, at this point it's with St. Francis and the light, I said, look, I want to stay here because the Baptists say if I'm not good, I might end up in hell. I'm just going to cut my losses and stay because I can tell that I'm in heaven. And that's when the light said, be you murderer or thief, priest or healer, there's only one place to go when you die. everybody comes to this one place. And I put my little hands on my hips because we had just learned about the Holocaust in school. And I said, wait a minute, what about Hitler? You mean Hitler got to come here too? And God said, yes, the soul that was once Hitler also came here. There's no such thing as hell. Hell can only be in a physical world. And that was kind of mind-blowing because they were just trying to reassure me that there's no other place to go when I die eventually. So if that was really my reasoning for not wanting to go back, I needed to get over the Baptist dogma, essentially, which was not fun to tell my parents when I was only 7, right? Because their job was to raise me spiritually, not the other way around.
Exactly. So how did they respond when you told them about this experience that you'd had?
They said that the morphine must have done something really interesting. They didn't really believe that I had an experience, or over the years they went back and forth. And certainly by the time I was in high school and I seemed to know things that I shouldn't, I would predict things that everybody gave me a very hard time about at the time. You know, it's like, well, Lori had her brain deprived of oxygen, so she comes up with stuff sometimes, just let it be. But when it came true, that scares people. And they started to realize something happened to her because she's different. And I thought everybody was, quote, psychic. To this day, I believe that everybody's intuitive. It's a matter of to what degree. And that for any of us who had a near-death experience, this is our main thing in common. Once you open that door, you cannot close it all the way. You're going to have a little more intuition, and certainly multiple NDEers, maybe even more intuition. Again, like every time you get in and out, you're cracking that door open a little further. And I have discovered that, and this is, I think, a big breakthrough, it's the endocrine system and the thyroid is the part of the physical body that we're utilizing when we're connecting to the other side. Like, what's different about us versus, quote, average people? It's something's altered in the endocrine system. And most of us have thyroid issues. And later in life, I had my thyroid surgically removed. So if I weren't already intuitive enough, take out that throat chakra, and I'll be speaking for not just myself, but whoever the light decides I'm speaking for that day, which is a gift and a curse. You know, I don't know to what degree you're dealing with it, but I think everybody who is an NDE knows what I mean when I say whatever we're doing that's different, it's a gift and a curse.
Oh, it absolutely is. And I hear from people all the time, oh, you're so lucky. I wish I could have an NDE. And I, because I do a lot of these interviews and hear a lot of different stories. And I always kind of think, yeah, well, I feel very, very lucky. But it's got two sides to this. It's not as smooth sailing as you'd think.
This is it.
And there's a lot of reintegration. I don't want to say issues. There's a process which happens. It's different for everybody.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. It is. It's a blessing and a curse, a gift and a,
It's about mainstreaming. It's about mainstreaming fellow man. It's about saying things that they think are nuts. And then sometimes, years later when it comes true, them being upset at the messenger.
Yeah, exactly. And I think now these days it's a lot easier to talk about these experiences. But your first experience, I think you said it was 1972. I mean, back then, this was not a conversation to have.
It was they all said I was over-medicated and that was some sort of a medicated dream from the morphine. The irony is in that second near-death experience, because I was considered terminal, they did give me morphine to keep comfortable. But what I explain to people, certainly after nursing school as well, when you get out of your physical body, it doesn't matter what medications are on board your physical body. You're out of it. So it's not having anything to do with the experience on the other side. And nobody down here believed that until Dr. Eben Alexander, a neurologist, said, you know what? It's true. I've been telling the medical community for 30 years that I was a nurse and all the time growing up. And, they're all just still dismissing that as insanity. So for years, I put all this stuff aside and just did my nurse job. Was a very intuitive nurse, which was helpful in my career. But so anyway. But let me let you ask questions.
No, that's okay. Did you become a nurse because of your experiences?
Absolutely. In the second near-death experience, I had already been interested in nursing from my first, mishap in the hospital. I was very impressed with the way they scurried around and tried to, let me go back to that first near-death experience for a minute. When you first get out of body, the interesting thing about being in that space is that you can understand what everybody in the room is thinking clearly. Like somehow you can separate your energy into, like, you can hear each of these individuals. Like, I can't understand 5 conversations at once, right? In my physical world. But up there, I understood exactly what everybody was thinking. And that fascinated me, that they all had one thing in mind. We got to get this little girl breathing again. They didn't even know why I wasn't breathing. It happened so fast. They're like, we didn't even cut on her yet. Why did she go out on us like that? And that's just, it's amazing to be able to get into people's heads like that. And after the experience, the doctor, when we were in the exam room, and as a follow-up at his office, I was trying to tell him what happened to me during the near-death experience. And he was telling me that, I just was out. And I said, you know what, when you bent down over me, and I looked at my mom and I said, Mom, you know how you told me that when strangers like try to kiss me, I should let you know? And she said, yeah. And she's like, why is that coming up? And I said, well, during the operation, he gave me a Hollywood kiss. I don't know why.
Oh.
It started mouth to mouth while they were trying to go get the equipment. Because back then, we would put mouth to mouth. We didn't put the little ring on. This is 1972.
Yeah.
So we were directly,
exactly.
So that's what my 7-year-old self perceived as, in the midst of all this, here he is giving me a long Hollywood kiss.
Yeah, he's trying to save your life.
And he's like, wait a minute. I didn't kiss. And then he realized that I was talking about when his mouth was on my mouth. And he said, no, I was giving her CPR. I was giving her a breath. And I told him, I said, the pin in your pocket, in your scrub pocket, when you bent down, it fell. And I watched that pin bounce on the floor, and I told him where he found it in the OR. I said, it went under that machinery. And he was like, that is my cross pin that I got when I graduated from my parents. And that is where it was. I had to go find it afterwards. So, I just,
to that? Was he?
I don't think he'd ever heard it before. And that's why when Dr. Melvin Morse wrote his book about pediatric near-death experiences in particular, that was a boon for me, because they don't listen to children. They really do just discount what children are saying. And so he was fascinated, though, and he didn't know how that happened. But he did have a line. He happened to be a Jewish doctor. And when he came in the room after I revived from the hepatitis years later, he said, that's enough to make me believe in Jesus Christ. And I'm like, wait, you don't believe in Jesus? I don't either, because he wasn't there. And I mean, because Jesus really wasn't there. And that's what the Baptist had prepared me for when I was terminal, is you'll die and Jesus will be there with his arms wide open. And instead it was kind of a cynically sweet St. Francis, who's just like, you do this to me every time. You keep dying before your other relatives are here to greet you. And if you die before any relatives that like my grandparents were still here, I didn't know anybody that had crossed over. And he said, he said, do you know your grandma's sister? And at the time, I had met her once, but I had forgotten that. So I said no. And I'm sad that I did, because I think if I said yes, he would have brought her there and let her be there. But I said no, because I just met her once, and he said, anybody that you love that's already crossed over, that's who would usually greet you. But you keep leaving before everybody else, because it did make me sad when he acted like he has to keep coming to get me because, there's nobody else to do it. But I have a theory about that. I wonder if when we have our near-death experience, if we really are seeing that particular character from history, or if our soul is taking somebody that we know from a previous lifetime, right? And sort of taking that guise. Because the longer I do the work I'm doing, the more I'm becoming convinced that whoever you first greet when you first get out of body, unless it is a relative or a loved one that you knew in that lifetime, it's your soul. It's your piece of the light, taking on whatever persona is going to make this experience the most understandable. But still, and I'd love other people's thoughts on that, when I'm in near-death experience groups where there's others of us, like, what is your thought on that? Did you have anybody greet you when you had yours in your near-death experience?
So for me personally, it was a weird one, because I was like you, I was quite young. I was only 12. I had my father in mind. Now, I never saw him. He was with me. I could hear him, but I couldn't find him. And he was living at the time, so it was a very unusual experience. But I do hear this, I've heard this theory quite a few times now, that if you're young and you haven't experienced much death, because at that stage I hadn't experienced, I still had my grandparents.
Right.
Well, the ones that had died I'd never really met. They lived overseas. So there wasn't anyone, the more I think about it, there probably wasn't anybody there to greet me. I hadn't lost anybody significant or, even somebody who had been quite prominent in my life. There was no one there. So I hear this theory that if you are there as one of the first, that often you are met by another figure who will connect with you.
When your father's higher self or soul was up there, that was the best person for you. You know what I mean? Somebody that was going to calm you down, make you understand that whatever's going on, it's okay. When we come into a physical lifetime, there's only a portion of our soul is down here being this physical person, and another portion stays up with the light. And so your father's soul from that state was handling this. And I'll bet you anything that your dad had no knowledge of this. It wasn't like when you woke up, he said, "Aren't you glad I was there?" I'm sure he didn't know this was happening, because most of us are completely unaware of what our soul is busy doing all day,
Yeah, exactly. He had no idea of it. So
amazing.
It was a weird one, because I just put it under the, pushed it away, because I thought, I sound a bit crazy and that's a bit too hard to deal with.
We can't say before, because that's why we weren't telling our stories for so long, is we were labeling it crazy.
Exactly. But now with the popularity of these things, with the internet, with the ability to share stories, the knowledge is raising, the awareness is raising, and we're not sounding so crazy. But I've spoken to loads of people who couldn't share their experience because they were so afraid of being put into some kind of institution or being told that they're mentally unwell, being medicated when obviously there was nothing really wrong.
It's happened many times.
It's happened so many times. So it's great to see the awareness, and that's a huge part that I feel that I have to play in this, is just opening that conversation, raising the awareness of these experiences.
Thank you.
So I have a question for you, is what are your thoughts around soul groups? Because I talked about how my father was in mine. I experienced seeing, it was probably about 7 or 8 beings. And I couldn't see any detail of them. I wasn't aware of who they were, but they felt very familiar. And I always wondered who they were. And I put it down to perhaps they were my soul group. Do you have any thoughts around
They are definitely part of your soul group. And here's what soul grouping is. And most of us who had a near-death experience are in, I don't know how many soul groups there are. I know that the one that I'm in and that you're in is the one that has to do with communication. So in between lifetimes, physical lifetimes, our souls are in the place where we help facilitate communication from that side, right, to the physical worlds, plural, right? There's more than one physical world that's inhabited. I just focus on the earth plane because that's where we are. But so in your situation, they were people that were from past lives that were extremely important to you and that you are important to them. But the reason that they wouldn't give you that clarity was that then you would come back here and be obsessed with trying to figure out who they were. And you might not ever find them in this lifetime because they were from a past life, you see? Because soul is just energy. It's just light and energy. And so they were just letting you know, I'm here, and you could feel that comfort. But they didn't show exactly who they were, else you'd be surprised at how intent you'd have been looking for those faces. Maybe seeing somebody down here who looked like one of them and then giving that person way too much, credit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a lot of those kinds of mix-ups. But yes, you are part of your dad's soul group, which is very interesting. We have a parallel there. When we're coming into a physical lifetime, we usually have something to do with one of our parents, like some history. Or else why would we be going there, right? Then in my case, I'll just use as an example. I have past lifetimes with my father in Native American past lives, right? We obviously are not Native American in this lifetime. His soul has joked that we had to infiltrate the white man to try to help their cause. But anyway, he was the draw. And my mom was just a great, gift to have gotten to know her. But we pick our parents, or our soul picks our parents. We've talked to a lot of people who are like, I did not pick my parents. So I've learned to differentiate now. Okay. There's the soul, who's the sum of everybody you've ever been or will be. And then there's your physical self, that one of those individuals. When we're born, and in your case too, it was your father's soul that called you to that space, because you guys are also in the communication soul group. Now, I'm sure there's other soul groups for, I don't know, creation, for technology. That's definitely not my group. You know what I mean? For whatever else there is in a physical world that needs some kind of assistance from the other side. And I can't think of anything that doesn't, to be honest. So, but our soul group is communication without question. And that means when we are in between physical lifetimes that we're helping facilitate that for others. And your father was the reason that, you came into that coupling too. So it's really fascinating the more you delve into this, how it all works. And I have the gift of constant clairaudience and conversation, you know what I mean, with what I jokingly call the folks on the other side. And I constantly refer to them as the folks upstairs. And I realize sometimes that everybody's always wondering, where's upstairs? Like they think I'm literally talking about the next level of a physical building. It's like, no, it's so hard to explain some of this. So you come up with metaphors. But
so is this a gift that you've received through your experiences, or do you know if you had any gifts before? I mean, 5's quite young, but do you remember any kind of abilities before that first experience?
No, I think I was average. I also know that you can get intuition or increased intuition through your DNA, often through your maternal line. And I know my grandma and my mom were often called psychic and intuitive, but they never agreed with that terminology. They just said they were very intuitive, and knowing or whatever. But no, absolutely the ability to do what I do for a living had to do with that second near-death experience. They literally told me, you're going to go back and you're going to facilitate communication from this side to the physical world. People need this kind of help, and you're going to do it. And
wow.
I resisted that too. I stayed in nursing for an extra 10 years because I just didn't want, you can make people angry, right? When they call you and you're telling them what their soul says. And it'd be so easy to pick up what people want to hear and just tell them that. But then what about your accuracy? If you're going to tell people what they want to hear, you're not going to be accurate. So it's very hard to tell people what they don't want to hear in order to prepare them. But I'm so grateful that when you do work like this, and you're telling somebody something tough, it's up to the light and their soul to lay a hand on their heart and say, listen, she doesn't have any skin in this game, so just listen to her, So that's very interesting. Now I went off on a tangent, but anyway, what was your original question? What do I think of soul groups?
No. Yeah, it's great. And I love the tangents. And while we're there, I just want to ask you, you just said that it took 10 years for you to get into the place doing the work that you think you were told to do, like the mission that you had to come back and do.
Yes.
For those 10 years, did you feel disconnected in any way, or did you feel I'm not able to voice my words.
You know what? I think I already know how to answer it though. When I was in nursing, one of the problems with being intuitive is that the more you develop that ability, maybe there's certain environments that you don't belong in. The last nursing job I had, I took care of policemen and police people, not just men, policemen and women, and firefighters and city employees when they were injured on the job. And when I would put a blood pressure cuff on somebody, I could pick up what was going on. So if I had a police officer who was getting injured repeatedly, say, on the job, one time a guy came in for a third injury in like 3 months, and I said, if you just would stop having the affair, you would stop having all this going on in your head, and you could pay attention to the job. And he was just what? And I was like, I'm kidding. Because sometimes it would just happen spontaneously. And it took a long time for me to understand that if that's who I am and that's what I do and I can't control that, then maybe I don't belong in that medical setting. you see, because people weren't there asking for a reading. Boundaries. And so that's really what my soul was trying to say. But eventually I resisted long enough, and I do want to give this as a big lesson to everybody. Don't resist what that inner voice is telling you to do. Because if you need to change your path in a physical lifetime and you don't do it, they're going to create a way for it to happen. And I didn't leave nursing. And eventually, and I'm going to bring this up, it's on the internet. So, and some people watching this will be like, oh, I've heard about her. I was eventually accused of breaching 2,500 people's medical data in my town's hospital system, and then had to spend 2 years defending that until a police investigation could show what really happened. And I, in a sense, lost my nurse career briefly, right, while I was defending these outrageous claims. Now, long story short, it turned out that 2 other people had actually breached my screen name and just looked up everybody who was anybody, like our mayor, the high-ranking people in our community. And so that was heartbreaking, to be accused of a crime that you didn't do to get yourself back on path. And it all worked out. And even though some of that is still on the internet, Huffington Post picked up the story. At one point I had interviewed and I said, I'm being picked on because I'm intuitive. I've had near-death experiences and I'm different. And oh man, the news went to town with that, And so they had, Huffington Post had a nurse in a nurse's uniform, complete with her cap on, looking in a crystal ball, and had this really slanderous article about me and how I had become the poster child for not letting nurses into the database, to see everything, and just what they now have mainstreamed it so that you can only see what your doctor that you work for orders, not everybody in the whole system, which would have been nice, because then the people who breached my screen name couldn't have done what they did. But the long story short, or the moral of the story here again, is that when we resist that constant voice, that says you're doing A and you should be doing B, when it doesn't go away over time, consider listening to it before something redirects.
Yeah. And, again, I hear this all the time. Usually it's a physical thing. So you hear the calling, the inner voice, you need to pivot your life slightly. You need to be doing some particular thing. And if we avoid it, that's where you hear, I've heard so many stories of suddenly there's a car accident or there's a diagnosis or a really life-changing crisis moment. And that's the thing that has, you're forced into making that huge change and following that voice.
Right.
So I so agree with you that we need to listen to the inner voice and act on that, because that is, I believe that is where we get our direction on what we're here to do, why we are here in this lifetime. Yeah.
Nobody outside of us can really tell us that. Not even our parents or the people who love us the most. They can't tell us that. Yeah. It really is.
Yeah. And we're often so busy racing around that we don't take time to listen to the voice. So it might be screaming at us, shouting at us. And if we're too busy, we're not actually able to hear it.
Right.
That's a whole nother thing, isn't it? So I love that this has come up, because this is a huge thing for me about taking time. And a lot of the listeners are into meditation and, great things like that, doing breathing, doing yoga, doing all these beautiful practices, which I love. But so often, and I mean, we're busy people, aren't we? Life is very full on.
Right.
And I love that this is coming out to just take some time and hear that inner voice, because it's so important.
It is.
Do you think that we all come here with a specific purpose, one thing we have to do?
I do. I absolutely do. In fact, the longer I'm alive as Lori, the more I start to think that there's actually nothing very random about our physical lifetimes, and here's why. As an intuitive person, if I'm doing readings and I'm telling somebody something that's going to happen in the future, and I can see that clear as a bell, that's not because I'm trying to project something that I want that person to go make happen, right? It's because on some level, that's what's written to happen. Now, once in a while, I will see something that actually does not end up occurring, but that's only because I'm giving voice to the, somebody's soul who's telling them, this is going to happen, which creates a response to where they do an action and change it, right? But the other thing that this is pivotal. When everybody crosses over and they get through that tunnel and they have that party when somebody comes to greet them, And then later they go to transition. When we're in transition, we get to greet, if you will, everybody that we love who's still down in the earth plane. We get to greet them at their future death. If that was random, how come it's always right? I don't know if I'm making sense here, but I'm going to go back to, of course, a lot of near-death experiencers understand that you've got you walk through that tunnel, and you've got what I jokingly call the party, the greetings from the people that have crossed before you. When you're done with that, you go into your meeting with the light. Who's the light? Who's God? Well, you take every individual soul that exists, which is not just human, it's anything with life, right? Anything with life has a soul. So you take every soul and you combine that energy and light into one big ball, and there you got God, the light. And when we are in our transition, we are literally in communication with all souls that exist at once. And that's why it's so powerful. That's why God has such a powerful, energy, if you will, like that source that we all come from. And then in that transition with the light, that's when you get to see the outcomes of all the people you still love. And literally within 5 to 10 days after that individual crossed over, they get to see the people who are still down here, maybe for 80 more years. They greet them at their death. So what does that tell us? It's not random. No matter how random a car accident looks, or a murder, or however there are ways to die, right? Because in my work, of course, I do a lot of sudden death. Sadly, even before the pandemic, there were a lot of suicides, a lot of male suicides between the ages of 28 and 32. At one point, I asked one of my clients, I said, did somebody share my name in a suicide support group or something? Because this is depressing to have this many people calling and saying, my son committed suicide 2 weeks ago and I need to talk to him, It was devastating. Yeah. And so, my other big, comfort in my work is that I've never met anybody on the other side who is in trauma, had a problem, and I know that some people have a philosophy that you can have trouble on the other side, like you can be in trauma. I just don't run into that. It's just not my experience, so.
Right. Yeah.
But,
wow, there is so much in this conversation. I love it. You've got my mind thinking quite a lot.
I'm sorry that I'm jumping so much. I should have tried to have
No, absolutely not. This is what I love, is when we just connect and we just have a conversation. I've loved this, Laurie. Thank you. Is there one thing, one key learning, one message, one thing that all of your experiences have taught you that you want to share? What is the thing that really drives you in this lifetime?
Well, there's that thing called universal truth, right? That even all religions would almost usually agree on, is that universal truth does drive the physical world, and that concept of karma or doing unto others is very real. So just to briefly say, speaking of being accused of a crime in this lifetime that I didn't do, at one point I truly fell to my knees and said, you know what, as far as I'm concerned, I work for the light. And now I've been accused of a crime and these people are so angry with me, I'm going to go play in traffic. I live next to a highway with big trucks that go by. And something said, my soul, number one, assured me, her main job is to keep me in this physical life. She said, if you go play in traffic, you'll wake up in a nursing home blinking once for yes and twice for no. I promise you. So I stayed in the house and I asked God, how could this happen to me? I'm a good person. I've tried so hard. And, besides getting me on path, there had to be another way, right? Than accusing me of a crime and making it front page news in my community. And then they showed me my most recent past life where that person did accuse somebody of a crime that they didn't do. They lost their reputation, and it also became, newsworthy. So that karma thing, that's what I spend a lot of time trying to explain to people. You're not getting away with anything, even if nobody saw you do it. So it really is that, do your own self a favor by being good, because what we do comes back around. And if you do happen to die, as I did in my past life, before you get a chance to, quote, make up for that or learn what you did to somebody else, then it's going to happen to you in a next lifetime. And it seems so unfair to pay for something that you did in a past life. But my soul said, same soul. I'm just like, Laurie didn't deserve it. Laurie didn't deserve it. But, so there's so much that we could talk about that I have learned as a 3-time near-death experiencer, and then in a 30-year nurse career of interviewing so many people like us, so that I had the courage to tell my story. That's why you have the courage to tell your story. There's so many of us now that they can't tell us that we're all crazy. It just doesn't work
anymore. Exactly. I love it. We probably do need to continue this conversation, because like you say, there is so much in there. I'm so curious to learn about your nursing time and all of the things that you've learned, the experiences that you've had firsthand there. But Laurie, I want to say thank you for coming on and sharing your experiences. They are so full of information. And yes, I know our listeners like me their mind will be on overdrive. It's not always easy to come on and to share experiences. So I thank you for that, and I acknowledge that. Laurie, Niell, thank you so much.
Kirsty, thank you so much for what you're doing too. It helps every one of us who are NDEers to get this word out to other people so that they will have open hearts to our story and stop worrying about our mental health. Much love and light to you.
Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Let's Talk Near Death podcast show. If you've enjoyed it, please share it with your friends, tell people about it. I'd love to get these messages out there. Don't forget you can also pick up your VIP access pass for additional content at patreon.com/Kirsty Salisbury. You can connect with us via the Let's Talk Near Death Facebook page, and I look forward to catching you for another episode soon.